Thank you. Recording in progress. So many of you know who I am. So I'm Lucinda, and you can see for yourself what I do. And my background, as some of you know, working with people I have my background in corporate learning and development, as Carol and Ali can testify. So now I also work for my day job is CEO of Actus. And we've started sharing these slides. I've been doing these webinars for over a year. And then we realized that no one actually knew what Actus was. So I thought that least I could do is at least, without plugging it, just let you know what we do in case it's something of interest or use to you. So we do training, which is a step on from the consultancy. That's what I was doing earlier. So we run 3 training programs: Change Superhero, which is linked to the book I wrote; Virtual Manager, which has been incredibly popular, obvious reasons; and Accelerate Potential, which is for those newbies. We run those in-house and externally. However, my main role really is delivering software. So we have performance management software, which of course is where I got a lot of the learning that I'm going to share with you today through the clients that we work with. We've got 60,000 users of the software and hundreds of clients that we've worked with. So we've got a sense of what works and what doesn't work for people. But the software doesn't just do performance management, it also does talent management 360, learning management, compliance. You can see for yourself. And we've also recently brought out some e-learning. So if you're ever looking at that sort of thing, or hear of someone looking for software that might be useful, then do consider having a look at Actus. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to look at the evidence for performance management, which this is something that is really, I'm quite keen to know more about. As a chartered psychologist, I want to try and make sure that what we're doing is balanced, is evidence-based, if you like. We're going to talk about this in relation to remote or hybrid working, which is hard to be evidence-based about because we are just doing it at the moment. So it seems to change all the time. So I'll be sharing what we've heard from people, because I'm talking to people like this regularly, bringing it right up to date. And actually on that note, those of you who have dropped off early, maybe we can drop it in the chat now. We are running a panel tomorrow talking about hybrid working. So I've got 3 people from HR professionals, senior HR professionals from different types of organisation, just talking about what they've done and how they're dealing with hybrid working. It's the first time we've ever run anything like this. It's at 1 o'clock tomorrow, I think. The link's in the chat if you want to sign up for that and take part in it. Just really, it's about sharing and collaborating ideas, which is what the HR Uprising is all about, helping everyone to add more value through collaboration. We'll look a bit, if you want to redesign your appraisal process or performance management process, and we'll look at the difference between the two and looked at some practical steps to gain buy-in. So back to you then. So why are you here, I suppose? What issues have you found, assuming you're HR, and perhaps let me know in the chat, are you HR learning and development, or are you a line manager or a consultant? Let's know what you are, but what in that context, what issues are you dealing with, or are you finding that the people you work with are dealing with, that are related not just to performance management, because that's always been a bit of a pain point, or certainly appraisal has, but in relation to doing it in a remote environment? What challenges do you think you've had? I'll give you a moment to think about it and put some answers in the chat. And then I've got a Blue Peter, which not all of you will know what Blue Peter is, but one I prepared earlier, poll that I'll be able to share with you, and to basically to give you some ideas, and you can see if that's there. So usually the chat takes a moment and I get a flurry. So I'll wait for people to come up with the flurry, but in the meantime, I'm going to put up some of the challenges that people have said before. Oh, Joe, straight in there, lack of data. And actually that's probably one I haven't got on here, which is interesting. Lack of data, HR having changing mindsets to, Juliet, what a brilliant point. Changing mindsets to focus on outcome-driven performance management rather than inputs. That is something that people just didn't really know how to do. Okay, so Laura, hi Laura, you're making tweaks based on hybrid working. Tell us what type of tweaks you're making, interested in that. Line management capability. That is coming through a lot. And actually that is something which I believe that we could get away with, maybe line managers not having the skills they needed. Maybe they'd never been given them. We could get away with them in the office. I don't quite know why, but we seem to be able to, because they were present. But suddenly when people were going remotely, it was much, much more difficult to do that, wasn't it? Lack of visibility, says Rowena. quality of managers, yeah, actually having people to be available. IT issues, my internet is poor, which also becomes an excuse or code, doesn't it? People working long hours. Really interesting. One-to-ones haven't necessarily been adapted well to remote working. So that is interesting, isn't it? Let me launch the polling and see. I'm not sure that I've covered all of your very good answers in here, so we'll grab these for next time we ask the question. So these are typical challenges that came before. You can choose more than one, but let's see whether or not any of these do it. So we've got lack of visibility. So potentially that the data, we could say that one maybe if it's about the data about performance. Managers not having the skills or confidence to manage people remotely. I'd say that also the fact they don't know how to measure against outputs would fit into that one. Oh, there you go. Oh, sorry, it's got its own one in its own right, measure or manage individual outputs. Again, one of the things I found, if you're trying to set objectives for people, we say you should set objectives and align with them with the overall strategy, particularly in small and mid-sized businesses, but I've worked with some larger businesses. They haven't necessarily been cascading it, so people were not necessarily aware of it. People not responsible, willing to take responsibility for performance, or missing that human touch. So those are the answers, and I'll keep an eye on yours here. So in learning, is that Mark? Are you saying learning and development? There, people getting away with just doing the minimum. Is that what you mean by that? Or do you mean something else that's needed, but using excuses about why outputs haven't been met? Encouraging increased tracking of achievements. So one of the yeah, because you're in oh sorry, of course you're I'm going to ask you where you worked. Of course, thank you very much. I'm getting it now. I asked a question and I'm clearly a bit dizzy from not concentrated properly there. So we've got lots of L&D people, got HR. Thank you. Yes, I get that now why you're putting that, because I asked you to. So in terms of this, looking at the responses, we've got 65% of people have responded. Maybe some of you haven't got the answer that you want to. I'll just give you a couple more seconds and then I'll share the polls and we'll see, you can see whether other people voted as you did. So a couple of minutes, I can't see who says what, it's anonymous, the polling, so don't feel shy. It's really just so that we can all get a sense of, it's a good way to temperature check whether your challenges are the same as other people's challenges. So again, these management skills has come out as the major reason in terms of them, but also visibility and then the human touch. So those are our top three. And the management skills and outputs, I think, link together. If any of you, well, hopefully you may have already seen, I did an ebook about 6 months ago on virtual management, and it talks about really just the differences between non-virtual management and management are subtle. Then it's not completely different. So we've been doing a virtual manager training program, and I would say that 70% of the content or even 80% of the content is the same. It's how you apply it. So the difference is you need to be able to set objectives. We always should have, but they need to be more output driven. We need to talk to people more frequently than once a month or maybe even once a week. We need to have more regular conversations which are about outputs but also about well-being, and we also probably need to change our style as managers to be more empowerment oriented. We'll put the link to that in the chat, and we'll also, in fact, what we'll do is we'll send that out to you when we send the link to the recording. We'll send you the ebook in case you haven't got it. I know some of you have got it anyway. You can always download it from the website, and Gemma's just popped it there if that's something you wanted to look at. So the challenges that you found there, I say we've got, are some people getting away with the minimum? That's interesting. Those are the sort of challenges that you feel that you've seen. Well, of course, how do we manage people? So it is about management skills, but it's also about performance management. And one of the key messages of this, the purpose of this one, is looking at the appraisal or performance management overall. And performance management is a process, and it's also a set of behaviours, and I think that's the challenge that we often have with our line managers, and that would be reinforced by the fact that so many of you said that the managers don't necessarily get it. And key point for them to understand, for everyone to understand, is that performance management and appraisals are completely different things. If we were to talk about complaints about the annual performance, I'm sure, in fact, hit me with it in the chat. What are the normal moans that you get about the annual appraisal? What do you think are the normal problems of the annual appraisal? Because it is a much maligned tool, yet people haven't necessarily come up with a completely new solution for it. People feel upset if they don't have one. If you look at, we're working with the NHS quite often, and that's a it's a big hot topic if they don't have an appraisal of some way. But one of the reasons for that, in my view, is because that's pretty much the only conversation they had. How fascinating, Sue. So Sue, you stopped doing it in 2019, but people miss it. What do they do instead, Sue? Could you tell us what they do instead? So definitely I've heard quality conversations. Tell us, how do you manage to do that? Really keen to know more about that, or what works or what doesn't work on that, because that's what everybody wants. Did you formalize it? Really keen to know more about that. So it does depend on the capability of your managers. It also depends on the motivation of your managers and the extent to which they think it's important. Process or tick box, that's coming through. That's very, very common. Joe, you're saying it's a surprise. So that means shouldn't be the first time staff hear about underperformance. Absolutely not. That's one of the worst things of it. Is that then because you have ratings or something in there, Joe, where people are getting to the end and then managers having to force rating? Yeah, okay. So lots of common things: process, tick box, too long, etc. And people just lose the will to live, don't they? So really common pain points. These are the sort of things that we hear regularly. Often it's called the performance development review, which actually isn't really performance related. It's like managing a business on purely the financial, the balance sheet, because the balance sheet is what you did last year. Looking at what we did last year is not necessarily a predictor of future performance. So we need to get that balance, and that's why objectives are so important. In many organizations, it doesn't culminate in anything, or if it does, it was a predetermined. I think someone here said a moment, actually, the ratings are predetermined. It's not a meaningful process, or if there are ratings, it's very painful and doesn't link to reward or talent management. The main issue, of course, is it's badly managed. So people have a poor experience. And it can also lack relevance to the day-to-day job. So it's almost, we do what we do all year round, and then we have the appraisal. And it's these two things, they should be all one process, all one, it should just be a natural conclusion, shouldn't it, of what's going on. So anyone else managed to move away from it successfully? Because top tips would be great. Mark, you're moving to a conversation matters approach as well. It's getting an overhaul. And of course, conversations are the primary point. And the thing is, I don't think any of us in L&D or HR would ever say they weren't. Interestingly, to see what the numbers are here, I surveyed on this, about 71 votes on this on LinkedIn about 6 months ago, just to find out whether appraisals were still live and kicking, if actually more people had found something better to do. And the majority of this, I need to find the original Gemma on this, I've forgotten this, it doesn't show up properly. The majority of them were yes, yes, or yes here, and 20% I think had ditched for ongoing checking. So 80% of those surveyed were still using appraisals. There are a few of them that wanted to change, but it was more about conversations. And a lot of people, when we drilled into it, they had tried to encourage ongoing conversations, but they still needed some sort of culmination, because it's needed often if you do want to do peer reviews or talent management, you need some sort of culmination. But it is important that what we do is of high quality. This it was key in terms of some research done across the whole of the NHS by Professor Michael West, which actually showed that a poor quality appraisal was worse than no appraisal at all. So there definitely is a point that if it's not working at all, and if you can't get our managers to deliver quality conversations, you might as well not bother. But people genuinely do complain about it if they don't have it. They feel that I think there's something here about if we don't fill it with something, managers, we've already said that part of the problem is the lack of skills of our managers, right? In a hybrid workplace, we realise that our managers really don't have the skills. And I know we've got people internationally here, which I'm very grateful for, but certainly in the UK, we stand out in terms of how badly trained our line managers are in many, many ways, which means that they're not necessarily delivering this well. So that the problem isn't about the process or the form. Sometimes the form doesn't help. It's about the way it's delivered. So if you're rethinking performance management or appraisal in your organisation, this isn't rocket science, but this is evidence-based. If you want to know what the evidence says about what genuinely drives performance, it's about having clear objectives and regular feedback is the primary, the most effective way of driving high performance. I'll come into the other points with you as well in a moment, but this point about clear objectives and regular feedback is also borne out by Dennis and Pritchard here, who say that researchers can't emphasize enough the importance of managers going beyond the formal annual or twice yearly appraisal and giving ongoing feedback to employees throughout the year on an informal basis. So this is about quality conversations, which is what many of you are saying that you've moved to. This is about quality conversations or one-to-ones or check-ins, whatever we want it to be. However, and we've got lots of L&D people here, I don't think these happen without us prescribing them in some way, and that's my experience. Now, I worked for Siemens, and a number of you on here worked with me at Siemens, and I remember when we were moving to performance management, we were moving online with performance management, which is actually how I got into this space. And we realized that one-to-ones were very important when we surveyed the organization, and we prescribed, but Siemens is a very prescriptive process-driven organization, so people were quite well behaved in that people had to have a minimum of once monthly one-to-one. And at that time, people felt that that was a lot, but do you know what? They ended up doing it. It created those habits, it created the expectation. We had a charter of what the manager expectations were, and it was obviously to do your appraisal, but it was to have a monthly one-to-one. Everyone was entitled to that. Now, with hybrid working, my view and my experience from what people are telling me is people need more than a monthly one-to-one, because actually things change too quickly and they need more regular feedback. So if you're in an organization which is a little bit more laissez-faire and a bit more relaxed, saying, right, we're going to ditch appraisal and move to conversations, the challenge is, will they happen? How can you can't just say have quality conversations if managers don't have the skill or motivation. They just won't happen, and you end up having nothing. And I guess that's my question to those guys. So Sue, really interested in what happened there. Was there any prescription or definition of what the quality conversations needed to be? Because that for me, I think to get people into habits, those need to happen. We need to have some sort of clarity about what is expected of those regular quality conversations to make them happen. Other facts in terms of evidence, and these other points here: performance ratings, honesty, and splitting them out, which links into my recommendation of a model that you can use. This comes from CIPD, Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. There was a paper that they did called Could Do Better. It's quite a good paper, actually, looking again more at the evidence out there. And they looked at performance ratings as well. And the jury's out on ratings. For me, ratings depends on, I guess it depends on the culture, what you're trying to achieve, and whether it's appropriate for your culture. But what they found in evidence was that actually performance ratings are different from development ratings. And therefore, if you wanted people to be honest, if they were giving you an end of year rating, which was going to affect your bonus or your salary, they might be more likely to go easy on you or be less honest than if they thought it was something which was going to relate to your development. So actually, if it was a 360 feedback, for example, and you were going on a development program, they were more likely to be honest. Now, I think that's quite interesting because therefore, to my mind, one of the problems about appraisals, when we talk about them being too long, is generally you are trying to review objectives, set a development plan, performance. Are people achieving performance? You might have competencies or values in there as well. What are your career aspirations? And then if you've got an end of year rating, overall rating. Is there any wonder that that is quite a painful mix of things, that takes a long time and you feel like you're going through the motions? And if you think about it, evaluating someone's performance at the same time as you evaluate their career expectations, although they are related, so you want a high performer to have, get talent opportunities, is it the same conversation? If you're telling someone they need to pull their socks up, does it then feel natural that you should be talking about, and where do you want to go for your next role? It might feel natural that you give people development there. The CIPD report B, I think it's called Could Do Better. Oh, it's down here at the bottom. I think what works in CIPD, the link is at the bottom of this slide, actually, so I can't grab it, but you can see it there. So it's called What Works in Performance Management, and it had a summary, a strapline, what could do better. So that's the link. So that we'll send you the slides out, and it's on there. So that's, I think, interesting. And I say I've got a recommendation about a model that you can use if you want to encourage ongoing performance management to maybe ease the pain of that end of year appraisal if it's a 3-hour epic. Because the conclusion I draw from that is it is actually better to split out performance and development conversations, and then they can be meaningful in different ways. And so we'll look more at that in a moment. So how is this affected by being in a hybrid environment? Well, I think the requirements are just greater in terms of the frequency. We're not seeing people performing that. We've talked about this already in terms of the challenges, in terms of the outputs. But can we simply go, let's move to a pure check-in culture? To my view, that is a bit simplistic. Great, Lynn, that's what we're talking about here as well. I think that's, does that work for you, Lynn? So Lynn's saying she splits the end of year conversations into 2 parts, performance then development. And do you run them both at the same time, Lynn, or what's the gap between them? My concern, if I was in-house and I said, right, we want to move to a check-in culture or to quality conversations, is if I just say, right, go off, appraisals have gone, go off and do quality conversations. First of all, will they actually happen? My sense is, God, I thought we were busy enough 20 years ago in-house. I think we're even busier now. And in this remote environment, gosh, it didn't take us long to have our diaries absolutely chocker with virtual meetings or wherever we go. We're not getting any less busy. We just fill, time just gets filled, doesn't it, with busyness. So what that thing is, will they actually happen? If it's seen as a check-in, is that seen as something that's really, really important? Is it a priority? Now, actually, this goes back to one of the things I do think we did well in Siemens, which was we actually set in everybody's role profile, if they're a line manager, that one of their key responsibilities was people management. And on top of that, we set them an objective, which they needed to meet the requirements of the people manager. Now, I say that might be a bit over prescriptive for some, but the purpose of doing that was to emphasize the fact that people management, if you have, you know, more than a couple of people in your team, is as important, and in some cases, if you've got 8 or more, if not, it's more important than than doing the day job. Because too many people psychologically haven't made that move from being an individual contributor to actually managing people. So if we just say go off and do it, will they happen? Personally, I don't think they will for the majority of them. On top of that, what's the quality of the interactions? And in terms of those quality of the interactions, the challenge that you often have with typical one-to-ones, so if we said we've got a classic timetable where we say, yeah, managers do one-to-ones and then they do the appraisal. Well, what's the mentality? The mentality is for the appraisal that they do it because HR have told them to do it. And the one-to-ones, they do it probably for themselves, the manager, and the one-to-one is a task checklist. Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? It's not necessarily about how are you doing, what development do you need, what coaching do you need, how are you going against your objectives. By all means, disagree with me, by the way. I'm just saying these are the stereotypical challenges I've got, and I can see some great content that I'll come back to in the chat there. So you have provided a framework, but it's not overly prescriptive. So it's a framework, a set of questions and expectations, and you've told people the frequency. So there you go. So you have an expectation, or people should feel the right to expect one. And then does give a gap. And it is, Jane, it's got to be about the culture and what you're trying to achieve with it, hasn't it? But even with that, would you say that you want to have flexible processes within your organisation, or do you want to have just a process for your organisation? Because I think it's quite hard to have multiple flexible processes within an organisation unless you're talking about very different groups. So if I thought of a manufacturing, maybe shop floor, there might be slightly different expectations to office staff, clinical stuff in a health environment, maybe academic stuff, maybe, but you need to have a really good case for having different expectations in terms of people management, because the managers are still managing people and people still have needs and requirements, don't they? So these are the challenges. I think there is also, if you go pure check-in, if you don't have an objective setting process, my concern would be, going back to our point about what actually drives high performance, is objectives, so goals and feedback. So even if you want to ditch appraisals, then I would recommend that you do have goals and feedback, because that's actually what drives performance there. So they can become a bit tactical if we're not careful. And of course, you have got this challenge in terms of administering reward or talent processes. So how can we move this on in this hybrid environment? Well, my sense, intentional is my current hybrid word. I'm going to look at it in relation to being intentional about the purpose of our performance management or about our appraisal. But also, I think being intentional about managing people is quite key. So is it about being intentional about what's the purpose of this check-in? Or is it about being intentional about when I go into the office, when it's hybrid, or when we have team meetings, or how we spend time together? My sense is, for us to be really effective as hybrid people managers, we can't get away with just going into the office and things happen. We have to be quite intentional about who we spend time with and how we do it, and more planned, probably. So if we're going to be intentional about what our current appraisal process is, and we want to change it, then these might be the questions that I would say to take a step back and reflect on. So, you know, what is the current situation within your organisation, and why do you want to change it? So are people telling you that the current form is too long and arduous and it's really, really painful? Or are people saying, why are we having to go through this? You know, it's too onerous, the expectations are too high. Or are people saying that my manager, they don't happen, we're not having quality conversations, it's not worth the paper it's written on? What is the pain point in your organisation? Have a think about what you've already got in place. So do you have an appraisal process or system, whether it's on paper or online? And think about, is that actually supporting or hindering it? So I've had people where they've gone, actually, I don't want to ditch the appraisal altogether, but what I want to do is simplify it because it's too long, or I want to split it out. So as Lynn's saying, she split stuff out. Or it might be that it's very, very backwards and it just needs a bit of a rebrand. So we worked with the Housing Association where they were talking about it being a performance review, and it was very long-winded. And actually they wanted it to be more upbeat. So they just rebranded it into an achievement review and just worded more of the questions about, you know, what is it you achieved? What are you most proud of? Which challenges have you overcome? So different coaching questions in the appraisal made it less backward looking and more forward looking. It just changed the entire tone of it. And it sort of gave the managers the coaching and guidance to go forwards. Think about things like, you know, values and competencies. If you, I'm going on to a call this afternoon where I'm helping them with an appraisal thing, and they have got behaviours coming at you left, right and centre. So people looking at competencies, at values and 360 feedback, and it's just too much. It would be overwhelming. So I just simplify things down and think about actually how much quality conversation can you have in one session about behaviours. You know, if you've got a competency framework with 13 competencies, that's ridiculous. You just can't do it. Again, everybody would lose the will to live. So just be quite specific about what you're changing. And there's no reason why you can't change things up on a reasonably regular basis, but always have a think about what problem are you trying to fix? Is it the fact that people are just not doing it? Is the problem the form, or is the problem the manager's perception of the form, or the organizational, the importance it lays on it, the fact people think they're doing it to help HR, in which case none of those are actually the appraisal process, performance management process isn't the issue. It's all of the cultural stuff around it. So think about how you might address those, because fundamentally, if we want people to perform, we need to have this goal setting and feedback. And actually a form of appraisal or check-in is a key way to formalize that and make sure it happens. In my experience, these tend to be different purposes. So those previous slides I was talking about is thinking about what's the main purpose of your process. And that depends on the culture of your organization. Is it about driving high performance and productivity? Is it, it's about profit and productivity? Is it, the purpose of it to make sure that you can distribute pay rises or reward? I mean, sometimes you might have these two come together. If you're in an organization where you don't get pay rises or there's no link to reward, then actually is it about making people feel valued, in which case the onus, and you can think about this, all the emphasis is going to be different, right? If it's about engaging people or it's about retention, then this is going to be much more about career development, positive strokes, and the high performance or alignment reward is going to be much more objectives or targets focused and have ratings. So you might have a different emphasis. So a simple way of breaking up a 3-hour epic appraisal into 4 quarterly check-ins, and you may well have seen this image because I've been using it. I designed it a number of years ago, but it's just become very popular recently. This is a simplistic way of doing it. You can cut your own pieces, Jane said earlier, for whatever it's the right culture to you. But the logic here for me supports this idea of splitting out development conversations and performance conversations. So in principle, if you are an organization that wants to drive both performance and retain talent, let's say the purpose of it is, we want to be a high performance culture, which means we want to develop and retain talent as well, then clearly we need to set objectives. We need to set objectives at the start of the year. So at month 12/1, we want people to be agreeing objectives. In fact, I can go through each one and we know, making sure they're clear, forward-looking objectives aligned to the business strategy. We do want to encourage people to have regular one-to-ones in between them, but depending on the culture, those might be weekly, monthly, or if you're lucky, quarterly. But I actually think that quarterly is the minimum that we should expect somebody to have some sort of meaningful conversation. Then at month 3, it's quite logical to talk about development. So when we talk about our development review here at month 3, the reason I think it's really useful to talk about development, I was in learning and development. I can see there's lots of you in L&D, and it's 20 years ago that I was there. And I remember, even when we had a performance management system, which was built in-house, that we'd get to the end of the year, that's when we talked about development, and then it would take 6 months for IT to extract these development needs on an Excel spreadsheet for me. And I think about it, well, actually, these are possibly 18 months old at least by the time I'm able to put in place a training plan. If you could get people to talk about development at the end of the first quarter, to my mind, that's so much more logical, because you sit down and say, okay, how are you getting on with your objectives? And if people are going, yeah, I'm doing great, but I'm struggling a bit with this one. Well, what development do you need? It may be training, it might be coaching, it could be anything. But the purpose is then you agree some development that could be achieved over the course of the year. You meet that development need, which allows that person to perform, to close that gap and perform within that same financial year. So I feel quite positive, but quite passionate about that. Quick system plug. It does really help if you have a system for this, because then you can pull that out real time. But you can clearly, if you're manual, you can ask people for those. If you have that conversation earlier in the year, you can pull that through. Yeah, objectives versus coaching career. Absolutely, Carol. See, we've been saying this stuff for years, haven't we? One day people will get there. Then at the mid-year appraisal, and whether you call it an appraisal or a development discussion or just a bigger check-in, but the point of this one is where you might talk about performance. So this is the no surprises thing, right? So this is where you want to be, actually, is this person on track with their objectives? Let's face it, in 6 months, a whole load can change. So do we need to tweak those objectives so that when it gets to the end of the year, we don't suddenly find somebody's not performing? They know if they're on track or not. But also, I think at the mid-year appraisal, you could also look at behaviours, values or competencies there if you wanted, depending on the purpose. Or you could look at those in terms of development, depending on whether you're going to develop them or whether you want to rate them. But you could choose to put them at different places. But the point is, what we're doing is we're divvying up, the longest one I ever came across was 10 pages. You're divvying up this 3-hour epic into, let's say, 3 45 which are higher quality. Maybe they're an hour, higher quality, but they've got different focuses on, and therefore they sit more naturally together. And remember that bit of evidence from the CIPD, which says that people are more honest, or they talk differently about performance ratings from development ratings. So by separating those conversations out, it feels to me those conversations have more integrity and sit more naturally together, so they're more honest. And then at the end of month 9, it's talking about career aspirations. So if you are an organisation where you have a talent management process, or all of us, doesn't matter how big you are, we want to retain our talent, don't we? We want to make people feel valued and engaged. Well, that's that conversation where that person's pretty much on track, hopefully, because you've been talking to them all year round. It's saying, what are your future aspirations? They're starting to get a bit bored. You show this, that engagement conversation. What do you want to do next year? Or what challenges, what projects might you want to get involved in? Maybe that means that you can spot an opportunity for them to have an objective which is slightly aside from their regular role the following year, which will develop them. So sticking that out again, it's really important if they're a high performer, but again, it's about just keeping people motivated and engaged. So the idea is then all of this then comes together because you've been having quality conversations all year round, but you have been not just doing check-in tactical conversations. You've talked about development, you've talked about objectives, you've talked about career aspirations. That end of the year, there's no surprises, Many of the conversations have already taken place. It shouldn't be a tick box exercise because it's a natural culmination, and you can focus on what people have achieved and again, right planning for the future. So that's that year. We kind of knew this where we got to. Great, you know, that was really effective. That needed to change. What are we going to do next year? So it becomes much more forward looking rather than a bit of a burden, bit of a pain. Okay, so nearly there, guys. So key points about continuous performance management. My suggestion is that you do link development where possible to the achievement of objective skills or competencies. Make it relevant, because that was the thing at the end of the year. It was more of a, oh, what development do you want, as opposed to what development do you need. That way it's better use of your training spend and people can see the whole sort of strategic link. You want to have discussions that are early in the year and ongoing. It really does help if you have got real-time visibility to be able to encourage this. And by that, I mean, if you are saying we expect you to talk 3 times a year, 4 times a year, however many times a year, if you can see, if you have got visibility of something like that through a system, it makes life a lot easier because you can nudge those behaviours. It's quite hard when you're trying to deliver organisational change if you have no visibility. And obviously Actus helps you with that, but as do other systems. We want managers to empower and hold staff accountable for learning during those one-to-ones. So this is about our managers' skills. So making sure our managers have got the right skills. And that is, again, that's coaching, holding people accountable. What are you going to do? It's the way in which they do it. It isn't tactical. So coaching skills, Carol said that, you know, again, this is these key skills, which are still in really short supply. And actually, I think coaching can happen less when people are remote because we're trying to control. Managers feel like they're trying to control things more, and also if people feel like you're in a rush, then sometimes they happen less as well. I think, yeah, we've talked about development ratings, performance ratings taken separate. If you do want to do ratings, be careful about that. Make sure you do some calibration around it. But you want to have as much the other thing, yeah, trying to be transparent about career opportunities and succession is more motivational. One of the other things, if you do clump them all together, is that people can feel that decisions are made about their future in a darkened room, or can be quite unfair in terms of collaboration. So if wherever possible, it's probably a whole separate topic about ratings and things. I advocate for things being as open and transparent as possible rather than darkened room, because it breeds more trust. Yeah, so Carol's saying, any ideas of how the employee draft their own final review and use that as a conversation starter for the review? I would 100% prefer to do that. I think that is about empowerment, isn't it? So it's about holding the person accountable. They should be, what we want is for everybody, again, particularly in a hybrid remote environment, is we all take responsibility for our own performance. And the only way to do that is by coaching people. Yeah, Lynn, so it's getting people to drive the discussion. But that is a management style, and that is not done everywhere. There are lots of places where that isn't done. Certainly, I would prefer it if it's an employee-driven piece, but not every culture is ready for that. So managers really do need to learn to be less directional in order to achieve that. So it sometimes takes a little while. So feel free, anyone else got any additional comments? I'll go back through the comments and chat in there, and any questions, I'm really happy to stay on for them. Talk to a million miles now because I know I've got lots of content here, but we will provide the slides, so I hope you could follow it. Questions or comments, welcome. Let me just mention this. If any of you want to come on this panel, I mentioned earlier, we've got a panel webinar happening tomorrow. So I've got Umar, Janet and Morna. And to be honest, anything could happen because we're just going to chat really about addressing the challenges of a hybrid workplace. I know personally they've all done some interesting stuff, so I'm sure they've got stuff to share, but it's really about crowdsourcing information. And then here in terms of what's coming up, these are our additional webinars. We're putting 4 webinars on in June just because we're repeating some of the ones that have been really popular, that people have had high demand for. Got a couple of new ones, and also I'll probably take a break in August. If you want to put anyone on our virtual management training, given that lots of you have managers who don't have the skills or competence, our virtual manager training, we do an open course. Next one's in September. So you can sign up for that if you're interested. We also run it in-house. So, and if you're someone who wants to know more about change yourself, the Change Superhero training is aimed more at HR OD people. And as ever, don't worry, all these links that come out, some other useful resources and links are here. And I think these are hyperlinks. So there's podcast episodes that are relevant and all the useful links are there. So I'm just going to have it. Oh, they're all being dropped in. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. So in the chat, you've got the drops. Now, I wanted to ask you while I come back and I will look at the chat. I've got one final poll for you. Right, should I just stop sharing results? I'm curious as to how we can, or how people network really, because I find LinkedIn, we have our HR uprising group on LinkedIn. Got about 800 or 900 members, but I'm finding LinkedIn can be a bit tricky to get people to talk on. I think it's because it used to send emails, it doesn't so much now. I know there's some groups locally, so I'm on HR Independence and some other HR groups, but I think they're a bit hit and miss, or they start trying to sell you stuff. Just really interested as to what you're doing. Any of you using? I tried Clubhouse for a bit, which was quite interesting, but I wasn't sure it was an HR L&D space necessarily. So some of you put another, let us know in the chat what you're doing. So how do you learn or collaborate? Just interested really, or how would you like to? So we're trying to do is push stuff through our HR uprising group. By all means, say it's just quite a simple place to go. But if any of you want to join that, please feel free. Some of you I know are already members. Let me have a look at what we've got here. We've got a bit blustered by the links there. Let me go back. Any other questions? Let me look at what Beth's saying. Oh, framework of 8 good questions that you ask all employees to complete before we meet them for the end of year review and appraisals. Beth, give us a couple of examples if you're still there, if they're great questions, if you can. That sounds nice. So is that thinking questions for them, Beth? Yes, so Brenda, your employee drives, manager guides, and organisation enables. That's a nice way of putting it, Brenda. So certainly, I think we're in agreement that if possible, get the employee to draft it first and use that as a conversation starter so they take ownership, and then the manager can also coach around it. The benefit of that is that you know what they're going to say, if you like, and you know where people's heads are as well. So I think you can pitch it. Any other responses on, I've got 70% of you voted on social tools. Almost 30% of you don't do it. If you don't do it, how do you come to be here? Do you look out for the emails? Just interested, how do you know about this? Are you on our mailing list or watch stuff? And if you've gone for another, what do you use? Please tell us what we're missing out. There's 4 of you who've got some social media platform that we don't know about. I'll share the things so you can all see what people are saying. So the majority use LinkedIn. Here we go. Relatively small use Facebook. Instagram, yeah, I must admit, I have an Instagram account, but I don't fully understand it yet. Twitter, don't use it, or another. So tell us a bit more about that. Just interested, really, so we can work out where to talk to people. WhatsApp, perfect. Yeah, so that's great, isn't it? Actually, WhatsApp is really useful. I don't have so many for work, but do for social. My children would say that's very middle-aged, by the way. So apologies to anyone under 30 on here. Maybe that they don't. Okay, so you go, Lindsay goes through CCMA, so that's a professional body. So you work in your professional body, internal ones, and WhatsApp. Beth's looking for questions for us. Great. Love to jump around. You're on the mailing list. That's great. So yeah, so I presume you all are. Oh, Beth, look, so anyone, how lovely of you. Thank you, Beth. So these are Beth has shared. Beth, are you okay if we popped these into the notes that go out to people in case anyone wants to borrow them? We'll just check in if they are, guys. Can we grab this, right, guys? Runaway is an app set up by another company. I've never heard of those, Mark. You're always full of learning. You always say to give us some new learning. Thank you, Beth. So we'll grab that and we'll pop those questions in. So nice, just nice to have some inspiration, isn't it, from other people? Really kind of you to share. Okay, so if there are any questions, let me know. Mentoring style app, interesting. Mark's got Runway there that he's recommending. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to stop it there. It's been lovely to have you all, and thanks so much for those of you who are repeat visitors, and thank you so much to see people that I used to work with. I'm really delighted to, as Carol, David, or Ali, if you're able to stay on, stay on. Be great just to say hi. And thank you everybody who's joining. I say there's another one next week if you can bear another one so soon. We've got our panel discussion tomorrow, and we've got some others this week. Thank you, Sarah, and do send us out. We'll send you out all the relevant links, but let us know if there's other topics that are useful to you. Great, I'm going to stop there.